My parents took my phone, while my sister screamed in pain 2 rooms away, then told me to go study because hospitals were a scam. When I begged them to look at her, Dad snapped, "Stop being dramatic." I just stared at him. That was 8 months ago. This morning, he bowed to the man who gave me the job that saved her life. My parents were convinced that earning my own money was bad for me. I was 16 and just wanted to help with my sister's chronic medication, but they insisted work would distract me from my studies to one day become a doctor and save our family. I watched them skip meals to afford it. Mom cleaned houses until her hands cracked and bled, making me feel guilty about them. "Look at these," she'd say. "So yours can hold a scalpel, not a mop." Dad worked 2 jobs and his face would go blank whenever his card got declined. I couldn't afford the things my friends had, new shoes, games, but that was nothing compared to watching them drown. Every dinner came with the same guilt trip. "We sacrifice everything so you won't have to." Or my favorite, "Other kids work because their parents failed them. We didn't fail you." They were drowning in bills but too proud to admit it. But my friend's uncle owned a construction company and knew our situation. At a family BBQ, he pulled me aside. "Listen, if you need work, show up at 7 a.m. he said quietly. "Tell your parents whatever. Everyone needs their own money. You never know what's going to happen." That Saturday, I told them I got into free SAT prep that met every Saturday morning. They were sus, but accepted. For 2 years, I showed up at the construction sites. I showered on the site and had my friend's uncle bring me my uniform. I saved most of what I earned, only spending money for my sister's medication, leaving it in the medicine cabinet so they'd think they had an extra refill. They never figured it out. The rest I saved because I felt as if I knew something worse was coming. Well, one Saturday evening, I came home from SAT prep, covered in concrete dust I'd tried to wash off at a gas station. My sister was on the couch, groaning and holding her stomach. She looked pale, sweaty, and was complaining to our parents. "It's just your period," Mom said. "Maybe something you ate," Dad added. I walked over and felt her forehead. She was burning up. "We should go to the hospital." "No," Dad snapped. "We're not made of money. Hospitals scam people for simple stomach aches." An hour passed, then 2. My sister's groans turned into whimpers. Real tears were streaming down her face now. I could hear her trying to muffle her cries so she wouldn't bother them. I grabbed my phone to call an ambulance, but then Dad snatched it from my hand. "Stop being dramatic. We're not wasting money on an ambulance for stomach pain. She'll be fine by morning." "Dad, look at her. Go study." They took my phone and sent me to my room. I sat at my desk, pretending to read while listening to my sister suffer through the walls. Every few minutes, a new wave of pain would hit and she'd cry out. My parents turned up the TV. It had been almost 3 hours. That's when she let out this huge scream, followed by silence and a loud crash. I sprinted out to find my sister collapsed on the bathroom floor, curled in the fetal position. Her face was gray. Now my parents panicked. Dad immediately carried her to the car while Mom grabbed her purse. I snatched my backpack on the way out, knowing exactly what was coming. The emergency room doctor examined her for less than 2 minutes. Her appendix is rupturing. She needs surgery within the hour or it could be fatal. But you see, we grew up in China. Deposit payment is necessary before surgeries. If you don't have it, you're out of luck. Well, the doctor sent my parents to the payment desk on the first floor, while nurses prepped my sister upstairs. I followed them down, watching their confidence evaporate as the clerk typed slowly on her computer. 30,000 RMB deposit required before we can begin surgery. My mom's voice cracked. "We don't have that much." The woman just looked at her. "Then I apologize, ma'am, but our daughter is dying." Mom cut her off. "I understand your situation," the woman replied, "but hospital policy requires payment before surgery." I watched my parents slump their shoulders. Dad was frantically opening his banking app. Mom was on her phone calling relatives, all of whom were conveniently not answering. "Please, I'll pay you back double, triple. I swear on my mother's grave." The woman glanced at her watch. "Perhaps you could try a medical loan company? There's one across the street that's still open." My parents looked at each other, completely broken. That's when I opened my backpack and pulled out all my savings. All the money that was required hit the counter with a thud. Dead silence. My parents looked at me. "Where did you get this?" Mom whispered. "I worked. Now please count it," I told the woman. "What? When?" My mom turned to me. "Why does that matter right now?" I shot back. Mom's face went white while the woman took the money and started counting. "You lied to us? For 2 years?" Dad added. The woman confirmed the amount was enough and informed the medics to start the surgery on my sister. I stared at my parents, looking at them like they were crazy. I asked them aloud if they were stupid. Big no-no in China. Mom's mouth opened, and Dad looked at me like I just slapped his sister. "Your daughter might die, and you're mad I worked to save her life." Their faces dropped when I said it, almost as if they hadn't yet rationally thought about the situation. They both went quiet and just sat down. I couldn't tell if they were mad, embarrassed, or what. I sat next to them. 20 minutes passed in complete silence. Then footsteps echoed down the hallway. My friend's uncle walked in. I had called him to let him know. My parents shot their eyes at him, and Dad stood up with this huge rage. His face went from red to purple as he recognized Uncle Wei standing there in his work clothes. "You corrupted my child!" Dad lunged forward, but Uncle sidestepped him easily while keeping his hands in his pockets. The whole waiting room turned to stare at us. Uncle stayed calm and just said, "My daughter saved your other daughter's life, so maybe focus on that." Dad froze mid-step and his fists shook at his sides. Mom suddenly grabbed my arm so hard I knew it would bruise. 2 years of lies while we sacrificed everything. Her voice cracked between being mad and totally crushed. Other families in the waiting room were watching us like we were some kind of show. I tried to pull my arm away, but Mom held on tighter. Uncle pulled out his phone and started scrolling through something. He turned the screen toward Dad, showing photo after photo of me at the construction site. There I was in a hard hat operating equipment and covered in concrete dust from head to toe. Uncle said she worked harder than grown men and never complained once. Dad's hands shook as he took the phone and scrolled through what looked like hundreds of pictures from the past 2 years. His face went from angry to confused to something I couldn't read. Mom let go of my arm and looked over his shoulder at the photos. After maybe an hour of silence, we all just sat there in the waiting room. I was stuck between my parents who wouldn't look at me. Mom kept whispering, "How could you?" over and over while Dad just stared at the surgery doors. The quiet felt worse than when they were yelling. Nobody said anything for the longest time. Then a nurse came out holding a clipboard, but not with news about my sister. She said the surgery was going well, but they needed more consent forms for a blood transfusion. I watched Dad's hand shake as he signed the papers, hours, and his anger was completely gone now, just fear. Mom suddenly turned to Uncle Wei and asked how much did you pay her. When he told her the hourly rate, she did the math in her head real quick. Her face went white when she realized that was more than she made in 3 days of cleaning houses. She looked at me then, at her own cracked hands, then back at me. Around 2 in the morning, Dad finally spoke, but his voice sounded empty. He said we wanted you to have clean hands like a doctor's hands. He grabbed my hands and looked at all the calluses and small scars from construction work. Not workers' hands like ours, he said, and his voice broke. Uncle Wei started explaining quietly how he trained me himself and made sure I knew all the safety stuff. He told them how the other workers looked out for me and treated me like family. He said she wasn't just some kid we used for cheap labor, but part of our crew. Mom listened with tears running down her face. At 3:30 in the morning, the surgeon finally came out still in his scrubs. He said the surgery was successful, but there were complications from waiting so long. If you'd waited another hour, he stopped, but we all knew what he meant. My sister would have died. Dad turned to me and I could see him fighting between his pride and being grateful. He asked how much money I had left from what I saved. When I told him about the emergency fund I kept hidden in different places, he completely broke down. It was the first time I ever saw my dad cry. The nurse came over and handed him some tissues while Mom just stood there frozen, watching him wipe his face with shaking hands. After about 10 minutes, a different nurse walked up and told us we could see Lily for a few minutes, but only 2 at a time. Mom grabbed my hand so tight it hurt, the first time she'd touched me since finding out about the money, and we followed the nurse down the hall to the ICU. Lily looked so small in that huge bed with tubes coming out of everywhere and machines beeping all around her. Her face was this awful gray color, and she had this breathing tube taped to her mouth. Mom's hand got even tighter on mine, and she whispered something about how my lies saved her life, but I could hear both the thank you and the anger mixed together in her voice. We stood there for maybe 5 minutes before the nurse made us leave so Dad could have his turn. The next morning, they moved Lily to a regular room, and by afternoon, she was starting to wake up. I wonder what's really going through the parents' minds right now. They're watching their whole belief system crack apart while their daughter's life hangs by a thread. The way they turned up the TV while she was crying makes me curious about whether they truly believed she was fine, or if they were just too scared to face reality. She kept making these confused faces and trying to talk, but her throat was too sore from the tube. Mom and Dad kept looking at each other every time she tried to ask what happened. This silent agreement passing between them to not tell her about the money, or the fight, or how close she came to dying. They just kept saying she got really sick and needed surgery, but everything was fine now. Around dinner time, a woman from the billing department knocked and asked Dad to come downstairs to handle some paperwork. I followed him down and watched his face go pale when she showed him the remaining balance after the deposit. Another 20,000 RMB for the ICU stay, medications, and follow-up care. His hand shook as he reached for his phone to check his bank account, even though we both knew there was nothing there. I pulled out my phone and showed him my other savings account, the one I'd been building for college. He stared at the screen for a long time before nodding and letting me transfer the money. The billing woman printed out receipts while Dad just sat there looking at the floor. On day 3, I was sitting with Lily, helping her sip water through a straw, when Manager Zhao walked in carrying this huge fruit basket. Behind him came 5 guys from the construction crew, all still in their work clothes and boots. They'd taken up a collection at the site and handed Dad an envelope thick with cash. Dad's face went red as he took it, barely able to look at these men who knew his daughter better than he did, who'd been protecting me at dangerous job sites while he thought I was studying. Manager Zhao patted my shoulder and told Lily I was the hardest worker he'd ever had, which made her eyes go wide with confusion. After they left, a woman in a gray suit showed up with a clipboard and official-looking badge. She introduced herself as a social worker and said she needed to investigate why there was such a delay in bringing Lily to the hospital. Dad's face went white as she explained that the hospital was required to report cases where medical care was delayed, especially when it resulted in a life-threatening situation. She needed to understand the timeline of events and would be interviewing each family member separately. Mom started crying again while the woman wrote notes about potential neglect charges. That evening, I heard Mom on the phone with her sister, lying about how we paid for everything. She kept saying we had savings set aside, that everything was under control, that there was no need for anyone to help or visit. Even after almost losing Lily, keeping face with the relatives mattered more than telling the truth. The social worker came back the next day and pulled me into a small conference room. She asked detailed questions about that night, when Lily first got sick, how long we waited, why we didn't call an ambulance right away. I looked her straight in the eye and lied, said I'd been asleep in my room studying, that my parents acted as soon as they realized how serious it was. She kept writing notes and asking the same questions different ways, clearly not buying it, but I stuck to my story. On day 4, Lily was finally alert enough to really talk and immediately started asking why everyone was acting so weird around her. She noticed how Mom and Dad kept exchanging these looks, how Dad seemed different with me, how Mom kept crying for no reason. I told her she'd given us all a big scare and left it at that, holding her hand when she squeezed it weakly. That afternoon, I saw Uncle Wei and Dad sitting in the hospital cafeteria through the window. Dad's whole body was stiff at first, arms crossed, leaning away from the table. But as they talked, I watched his shoulders slowly drop, his arms uncross, and finally they shook hands across the table. Uncle Wei patted Dad's shoulder as they stood up, and Dad actually gave him a small bow, something I'd never seen him do for anyone who wasn't family or a boss. On the 5th day, Mom was helping me find a phone charger in my backpack when she pulled out my construction work clothes that I'd stuffed in there that night. She held the hard hat for the longest time, running her fingers over all the scratches and dents, the faded safety stickers, the sweat stains on the straps. She found the steel-toed boots caked with dried concrete, the work gloves with holes worn through the palms, the reflective vest with my name written in marker across the back. Her hands started shaking as she whispered that I could have been killed, that construction sites were death traps, that she'd seen news stories about workers falling from scaffolding or getting crushed by equipment. The doorbell rang while she was still holding my work vest, and we all froze. Through the window, I could see the social worker from before standing with an older woman in a suit. Mom shoved the equipment back in the closet and opened the door with a fake smile. The supervisor introduced herself and said said they'd been talking to our neighbors about our family's medical history. Mrs. Amy from downstairs had told them about the time Mom refused to take me to the hospital when I broke my finger. Mr. Wang mentioned how Dad made Lily walk to school with a fever of 102 degrees. The supervisor pulled out a folder thick with papers and said the investigation was now formal. Dad's face went white as she explained they'd need to interview each of us separately, starting with Lily. Mom kept insisting everything was a misunderstanding, but the supervisor wasn't listening anymore. She scheduled appointments for the next week and left us with more paperwork than I'd ever seen. That night, the doctor called to say Lily could come home soon, but would need 3 months of physical therapy. The sessions would cost 8,000 yuan per month. Dad slammed his phone down and stared at the wall. I went to my room and came back with the rest of my construction money, 25,000 yuan in a plastic bag. His jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth might crack, but he took it without a word. Mom started crying again, but this time it was different, like she was drowning in shame. 2 weeks passed with everyone walking on eggshells around each other. Then one afternoon, Mom cornered me and the kid Amy while Dad was at work. She started listing every way I could have died at that construction site. Falling from scaffolding, getting hit by a crane, electrocuted by exposed wires, crushed under concrete blocks. Her voice got louder with each possibility until she was almost screaming. Better than watching Lily die while you counted yuan. The words exploded out of me before I could stop them. She slapped me hard across the face, and we both stood there shocked. Neither of us had ever done anything like that before. The hospital called the next day saying we needed a family counseling session before Lily's discharge. We sat in a circle in this tiny office pretending everything was normal while Lily watched us confused. The counselor asked about our family dynamics, and we all gave perfect answers like robots. Lily kept looking between us trying to figure out why everyone was acting so weird. After the session, Manager Zhao called me. He said once Lily recovered, he could offer me legitimate part-time work with proper paperwork and my parents' permission. I mentioned it to Dad that night and watched his face cycle through anger, pride, defeat, and finally resignation. We'll discuss it, was all he said. 3 weeks after the surgery, Lily finally came home, but she was so weak she could barely walk. I helped her with the physical therapy exercises the nurse had shown us while Mom hovered nearby, wringing her hands. Lily kept asking why we all looked so guilty around her. Mom would change the subject and Dad would leave the room. We were keeping so many secrets from her it felt like the whole family might collapse. The mail arrived with an official letter from social services. They wanted to interview Lily about the night of her surgery. Dad's hands shook as he read it out loud. She still didn't know we'd delayed taking her to the hospital. If she found out during the interview, we could lose custody. Mom grabbed the letter and locked herself in the bathroom crying. I went back to school after 3 weeks of absence and everyone stared at me. Teachers pulled me aside asking where I'd been. My classmates whispered behind my back. My friend whose uncle gave me the job kept telling everyone I'd been at SAT prep just like we'd always said. But some kids had seen me at the hospital and the rumors were spreading. Mom was going through my room looking for more evidence of my lies when she found 2 years of forged permission slips, work release forms with her signature that she'd never signed, absence notes for school with Dad's handwriting that I'd copied perfectly. What else did you lie about? She held the papers with shaking hands. I couldn't answer because the truth was I'd lied about everything. 2 months after the surgery, I was helping Lily with her math homework at the Kit Amy table. Dad stood in the doorway watching us for a long time. You grew up while we weren't looking. It was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever get from him. Lily looked up confused by the comment but went back to her equations. 3 days later, a social worker showed up at our apartment with a clipboard and that fake smile they all wear. She sat across from Lily on our worn couch while my parents and I stood nearby like we were on trial. The woman asked Lily about her surgery and recovery, which went fine until she started asking about other times she'd been sick. Lily mentioned the time her stomach hurt for days, and Mom told her to drink hot water and wait it out. Then she talked about when she had that bad fever last year, and Dad said hospitals were for real emergencies only. Each time Lily spoke, the social worker's pen moved faster across her paper. My parents kept shifting their weight, and I could see Dad's jaw clenching harder with each question. The construction crew showing up with cash while Dad's sitting there like a broken calculator is peak comedy. Nothing says plot twist quite like your secret boss meeting your kid for the first time in a hospital room. The woman thanked Lily and said she'd be back next week for another visit. After she left, my parents didn't speak for hours. 2 days passed before Uncle called to say he was coming for dinner, which shocked everyone since my parents had never invited him over in all the years I'd known him. Mom spent the whole day cleaning and cooking way too much food like she was trying to prove something. When Uncle arrived, Lily ran up and hugged him, which surprised everyone, including him. She started telling him about her surgery scar and how the doctors saved her life. Uncle listened and smiled, but I could see him watching my parents who stood stiff in the doorway. We ate mostly in silence except for Lily, who kept asking Uncle about his construction company and if she could visit sometime. Mom kept refilling everyone's plates even when we said we were full. Dad barely touched his food and kept checking his phone like he was waiting for bad news. After Uncle left, Mom started washing dishes so hard I thought she'd break them. The next morning, we got an official letter saying social services scheduled a formal hearing in 2 weeks to determine if my parents showed medical neglect. Dad read it 3 times before slamming it on the table. He grabbed his phone and started searching for lawyers, which was huge since he'd never admitted needing help from anyone before. Every lawyer wanted money up front that we didn't have. I heard him on the phone with 5 different offices, all saying the same thing about payment plans they didn't offer. That night, I found Mom in the bathroom staring at her cracked hands under the harsh light. She was crying but trying to be quiet about it. When she saw me, she held up her ruined hands and said she cleaned toilets for years so mine would never look like this. She said now we might lose everything anyway, and what was it all for? I didn't know what to say, so I just stood there while she cried harder. The next day, we met with a legal aid lawyer in a cramped office that smelled like old coffee. He reviewed our case for 20 minutes before looking up with that same expression the social worker had. He said the delay in getting Lily treatment was documented in her medical records, and our best option was showing we were taking steps to change. He mentioned parenting classes and family counseling like they were medicine we had to swallow. Dad's face went red, but he nodded and took the pamphlets. A week passed and Lily was getting stronger, but she kept asking why everyone seemed seemed so upset all the time. She noticed Mom and Dad whispering in corners and stopping when she walked in. One afternoon, she asked me directly if something bad happened while she was sick. I told her everything was fine, but she didn't believe me, and I could see hurt in her eyes from the lie. That weekend, I went back to the construction site to get my last paycheck from the office. The whole crew was there for lunch break, and they all stood up when I walked in. Manager came over and shook my hand hard, saying I did the right thing saving my sister. The other workers nodded and patted my back, and one older guy said, "Family comes first always." Manager handed me my check plus an envelope with extra cash the crew had collected for me. I tried to refuse, but he pushed it back into my hands and said to use it for Lily. Walking home, I felt proud for the first time since this whole mess started. The following Monday, I watched Dad leave for his first mandated parenting class at the community center. His shoulders were slumped like he was walking to his execution. The man who always said he knew best about raising his kids now had to sit in a circle with strangers and admit he'd messed up. Mom watched from the window until he turned the corner, then went back to scrubbing the kid Amy, even though it was already clean. 2 days later, Mom came home early from her cleaning job looking pale. Her boss had found out about the social services investigation and said she was a liability to have around clients' homes. Just like that, we lost half our income with bills piling up and lawyer fees we couldn't afford. Mom sat at the kid Amy table staring at the termination letter like it might change if she looked long enough. Dad came home from his second parenting class and found her there. They didn't fight or yell, just sat together in silence while Lily did homework in the next room, not knowing our money problems just got worse. That Friday, Uncle called Mom with a job offer cleaning his construction company's offices. Better pay than her old job and better hours too. Mom accepted immediately without even pretending to think about it because pride wasn't something we could afford anymore. She started the next Monday and came home that first day looking less defeated than she had in weeks. 2 weeks later, Lily was finally strong enough to go back to school part-time, and I walked her there every morning carrying her heavy backpack while she held onto my arm for support. The other kids kept staring at the surgical scars on her neck that her uniform couldn't quite hide, and some whispered behind their hands, but Lily just lifted her chin higher and walked past them like they didn't exist. Our first family counseling session happened that Thursday, and the therapist made us sit in a circle while she asked questions about how we handled medical decisions in our family. When she brought up the pattern of delaying treatment for Lily's condition over the years, Mom started crying, and Dad stared at the floor while Lily sat there silent, finally understanding that this wasn't the first time they'd ignored her pain because of money. The ride home was dead quiet until we got inside, and Lily exploded screaming that we almost let her die over money, and her rage was so pure and simple, without any of the complicated understanding adults have about being poor. The social services hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks out, and our court-appointed lawyer met with us twice to prepare, warning us they might recommend supervised visits, or even temporary removal, while he asked me to research emancipation laws just in case things went really bad. Dad picked up a third job doing night security at a warehouse, and I found him passed out at the Kit Amy table one morning with his face pressed against his work schedule, while bills from the hospital kept arriving in thick envelopes every few days. Lily stopped talking to our parents completely, and would only speak to me asking how long I'd been saving money, and if I knew something like this would happen, while her trust in them was completely broken. The morning of the hearing, I testified first telling the panel how much my parents loved us, while carefully admitting that being poor had affected their decisions, and the 3 panel members just stared at me with blank faces, giving nothing away. Mom went next and broke down completely when she had to describe choosing between buying food and getting Lily's medicine, explaining how she'd skip meals so we could eat, and how she'd work until her hands bled to pay rent. We spent the next week waiting for their decision, and the apartment felt like a tomb, except for the sounds of Lily doing her physical therapy exercises while each day stretched out forever. Manager showed up to testify as a character witness, bringing photos of me working at construction sites at 14 years old, explaining how desperate I was to help my family and how I'd work harder than grown men just to earn enough for medicine. The day of the panel hearing finally came, and we all sat in this cold government building with fluorescent lights that made everyone look sick while Dad kept pulling at his collar and Mom gripped her purse so tight her knuckles went white. The panel consisted of 3 people behind a long table looking through stacks of papers about our family, while a court reporter typed everything, and I watched Dad stand up when they called his name. His hands shook as he walked to the front, and the lead panel member asked him about the night Lily almost died, and Dad's voice cracked when he started talking. He told them about his pride and how it stopped him from asking for help, and then said something I never expected to hear from him. I failed my daughters, but taking them away won't fix that. The panel members looked at each other and wrote notes while Mom started crying quietly, and Lily reached over to hold her hand. After 2 hours of questions and testimony, the panel went into another room to decide our fate, and we waited in that hallway for what felt like forever until they called us back in. The lead panel member stood up and read from a paper saying we would stay together, but under mandatory supervision for 6 months, with required parenting classes and regular check-ins from social workers. Mom collapsed into her chair with relief, while Dad just nodded and signed whatever papers they put in front of him, and Lily squeezed my hand so hard it hurt. Week 12 of supervision came, and the social worker knocked on our door at exactly 9 in the morning, finding our apartment spotless with Lily's medications organized in a clear plastic container with dates and times written on each section. We all sat on the couch answering questions while the social worker checked our refrigerator and looked through Lily's medical records, and Mom kept offering her tea every 5 minutes. I had started working legally at Uncle's company after school doing filing and answering phones, which brought in some money, but not nearly enough for all our bills that kept piling up. The work was boring compared to construction, but at least my parents knew about it now, and Uncle paid me fairly, even though Dad still wouldn't look him in the eye. Lily started forgiving Mom first by letting her help with homework again, and then Dad when she asked him to walk her to school one morning, which made him cry right there at the breakfast table. One night at dinner, Lily said something that broke all our hearts when she looked at them and said she was angry they almost let her die, but she understood being poor now. Lily's words at the end there, "She gets being poor now," that's a heavy thing for a kid to understand. hand makes me wonder what exactly clicked for her during all this mess with the hearings and therapy sessions. 3 months into supervision, I woke up early to use the bathroom and found Dad collapsed on the floor, barely conscious from exhaustion after working 3 different jobs. Mom and I dragged him to his bed where he slept for 16 hours straight while we called in sick to his jobs, and Mom held his hand the whole time. The family counselor assigned us homework, which meant weekly family meetings where everyone had to speak honestly about their feelings, and the first one was so awkward we all just stared at the floor. Mom tried to make it better by serving tea and snacks, but nobody wanted to eat while talking about how messed up our family had become. During the 3rd meeting, Mom discovered Dad had been skipping meals to save money when Lily mentioned seeing him throw away his lunch at work where she'd gone to visit him. They had their first real fight in years right there in front of us, not about saving face or what neighbors would think, but about actual survival and whether pride was worth dying for. Mom threw a plate against the wall, and Dad punched the refrigerator, leaving a dent, while Lily and I just watched them finally act like real people instead of robots. After they calmed down, Lily asked me to teach her about money and budgeting, so we spent the next Saturday making spreadsheets on my phone showing income and expenses. She took notes in a little notebook and asked questions about interest rates and savings accounts, and kept saying she never wanted to be helpless again, which made me proud and sad at the same time. Week 14 arrived, and Uncle called Dad about a job opportunity at his friend's company that paid almost double what Dad was making at his 3 jobs combined. Dad's pride fought hard against accepting what he called charity from the man who corrupted me, but Uncle just stood there in our doorway holding the job application and waiting. The standoff lasted 10 minutes with nobody saying anything until Lily walked over and took the application from Uncle's hand and put it in Dad's lap. Dad stared at the paper for a long time while his fingers traced the salary numbers over and over like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Uncle waited in the doorway without moving until Dad finally looked up and gave him this tiny nod that probably cost him more than any of us would ever know. The next morning, Mom started her new office job that Uncle had arranged through another friend, and I spent 3 hours after school teaching her how to use the computer while her cracked hands shook trying to hit the right keys. She kept apologizing every time she made a mistake, but I just moved her fingers to the right spots, and we kept going until she could type her name without looking. 2 days later, the school counselor pulled me out of math class and sat me down with this whole stack of papers showing how my grades had dropped from straight A's to barely passing. She kept asking if everything was okay at home, and I just nodded because what else could I say without explaining that I was still working construction every weekend to keep money saved for the next emergency. Dad started his new job that same week, and at dinner on Friday, he stood up and walked over to where Uncle was eating with us and bowed deeply, which made everyone go silent because Chinese fathers don't bow to anyone. Uncle tried to wave him off, but Dad stayed bent over for 10 full seconds before sitting back down, and we all just kept eating like nothing happened, even though Mom was crying into her rice. 3 weeks passed, and things felt almost normal until Saturday morning when Lily woke up with a fever and her surgical scar looking red and swollen. This time, nobody argued about money or waited to see if it would get better because we all just grabbed our stuff and Dad drove straight to the hospital while Mom called ahead to let them know we were coming. The emergency room doctor checked her and immediately started her on IV antibiotics, saying we did exactly right by coming immediately because post-surgical infections can turn dangerous fast. The social worker who'd been assigned to our case after the first incident wrote something in her folder and told us she was noting our appropriate medical response, which felt weird to be praised for doing what should have been obvious. Month 4 of our mandatory family counseling arrived, and the therapist stopped having to prompt us to talk because now Dad would actually say when he was stressed about money instead of just working himself to death. Mom admitted she was scared of hospitals because her mother died in one when she was young, which explained so much about that first night with Lily. I even told them about still working construction, which made them mad for about 5 minutes before Dad said, at least I'd learned useful skills. The academic awards ceremony at school came in May, and despite my grades tanking, I somehow won a small scholarship for an essay I'd written about family sacrifice. Dad sat in the front row, and when they called my name, he stood up clapping, and I could see tears running down his face, which made everyone else start crying too. The next weekend, the construction crew surprised me with a graduation party at the site, complete with a cake shaped like a hard hat and a toolbox they'd all pitched in to buy me for university. Manager Zhao made a speech about how I was the hardest working kid he'd ever hired, and how I better come back and build them something amazing someday. They'd even gotten me real construction grade tools with my name engraved on them, saying these were for building my future, which made me ugly cry right there in front of everyone. Week 17 arrived, and Mom came home from her job with the good health insurance, showing me her hands, which had finally healed completely after months of prescription creams and proper treatment. She kept turning them over and over like she couldn't believe they were hers, and grabbed my face saying she could finally touch me without being embarrassed about her rough skin. Lily went back to school full-time that same week after missing so much from her surgery and recovery, but she'd worked with tutors to catch up on everything. She found a support group for kids with chronic health conditions that met after school on Wednesdays, and came home talking about other kids who understood what it felt like to be the sick one in the family. 5 months into our supervision period, the social worker started showing up more often, sometimes twice a week instead of just once. She'd sit at our Kit Amy table with her clipboard and go through this huge checklist, asking Lily about school, checking Mom and Dad's work schedules, looking through our bank statements that we had to provide every month. She even called Lily's teachers to verify her attendance records and pulled her medical files from the hospital to track every single appointment. Mom would clean the apartment for hours before each visit, scrubbing spots that were already clean, arranging and rearranging the furniture like the social worker was grading us on how straight our couch cushions were. Dad started keeping this folder with every receipt, every pay stub, every document that proved we were doing what we were supposed to do. The social worker interviewed our neighbors too. I'd see her in the hallway with her notebook, asking them if they'd noticed any problems, any yelling, any signs of trouble. Week 18 came and Dad surprised me by asking if I wanted to work with him at his new construction job on Saturday, legally this time, with proper paperwork and everything. We showed up at 7 in the morning, and I watched his face change when he saw me me carrying those heavy cement bags without breaking a sweat, operating the drill like I'd done it 1,000 times before, which I had. He kept watching me work, not saying much, just observing how I knew exactly where to position the rebar, how I could read the blueprints without asking questions. During our lunch break, sitting on a stack of lumber eating convenience store sandwiches, he finally looked at me and said those 3 words I'd been waiting 2 years to hear. The final social services review happened the next week in this cold government building downtown, where we all had to sit in these plastic chairs while 3 panel members went through our case file that was thick as a phone book. They read through every report, every home visit note, every piece of documentation we'd submitted over the past 6 months. The lead reviewer, this woman with glasses that kept sliding down her nose, kept mentioning our financial situation, how we were still struggling even with both parents working, how that remained a risk factor for the family's stability. We sat there for 3 hours while they discussed us like we weren't even in the room, using terms like adequate progress and ongoing concerns and potential for relapse. Uncle showed up halfway through without anyone telling him to come, walked right into that review room in his work clothes still dusty from the construction site. He told the panel about watching our family change, seeing my parents actually listen to their kids now instead of just demanding blind obedience, watching them choose Lily's health over their pride every single time since that night at the hospital. The panel members actually put down their pens and listened when he said that one line about pride and humility, writing it down word for word in their notes. That night, Lily stayed up late writing her own letter to the panel on notebook paper, her handwriting careful and neat like she was turning in homework. She wrote about how Mom asks her how she feels now instead of telling her how she should feel, how Dad doesn't yell anymore when she needs expensive medicine, how they both show up to her doctor appointments even if it means missing work. She ended it with that one sentence about choosing her over pride, folded it carefully, and gave it to the social worker at our next visit. Dad asking his son to work legally at his new job hits different when you realize he's basically saying, "I see you now," without actually saying it. Pride swallowing takes many forms, apparently. Mom shocked everyone by enrolling in night classes at the community college to get certified in medical billing, using the computer at the library to do her homework because we didn't have one at home. She'd come back from class at 10 at night and practice medical codes at the Kid Amy table, determined to get a better job than cleaning houses. She'd look at me sometimes while studying and say that thing about learning computers, like we were in some kind of competition about who could work harder. 2 weeks later, we got the official letter saying the panel was closing our case, that the 6 months of supervision were over, that we'd met all the requirements and the family unit would remain intact. Mom grabbed both me and Lily, and we just stood there in the courthouse bathroom crying. Not the pretty kind of crying, but the ugly kind where your nose runs and you can't catch your breath. Even the bathroom attendant started crying when she asked if we were okay, and Mom told her what happened. Week 20 brought the biggest surprise when Dad came home carrying this chocolate cake from the expensive bakery downtown, not the cheap grocery store kind we usually got for birthdays. He'd gotten promoted to shift supervisor at his job, making almost double what he made before, and for the first time since I could remember, we weren't counting every UN, weren't choosing between groceries and Lily's medicine, weren't watching Mom's hands crack and bleed from cleaning chemicals. We ate that entire cake that night, even though it was a Tuesday and we had school the next morning, just the 4 of us around the Kid Amy table, not talking about money or sacrifice or what we couldn't afford. I started preparing for university entrance exams while working part-time at Uncle's construction company on weekends, legally now with all the proper permits and insurance. The whole crew knew I was going to college soon and kept promising they'd all show up with their trucks when it was time to move, making jokes about how they'd finally have someone smart to help them with contracts. Manager would assign me the easier jobs now, saying I needed to protect my hands for holding textbooks, not hammers, but I still did the heavy work when no one was looking. Lily had been taking her medication regularly for months now, and her health was completely stable. No more emergency room visits, no more missed school days, no more pale face and stomach pain. She started talking about wanting to be a doctor too, but not because Mom and Dad pushed it on her, not because of family expectations or saving face, but because she wanted to help other kids who were sick like she was, who needed someone who understood what it felt like to be the patient instead of just the doctor. 5 months passed and we all sat around the dinner table for a different kind of meeting this time. Mom put down her chopsticks and asked what I wanted to study in university. Not what they wanted for me, but what I actually wanted. Dad nodded and said they'd been wrong about a lot of things. I told them about wanting to study engineering since I'd learned so much at the construction sites. They looked at each other and smiled. Mom had been taking computer classes at the community center after work. Her hands didn't crack and bleed anymore because she'd been promoted to supervisor at the cleaning company. She was teaching other cleaners how to use the scheduling software and inventory systems. The acceptance letter from Guangzhou University of Technology came 3 weeks later with a partial scholarship. Dad actually laughed when he read it and said my construction experience would probably help with the engineering courses. It was the first real laugh I'd heard from him in months. Lily and I were sitting on her bed one evening going through old photos when she turned to me. She said I'd saved her life twice that year. Once with the money for surgery, and once by showing her what real strength looked like. Spring Festival arrived and all the relatives came over like they always did. Aunt May asked about my studies and Mom just told the truth about everything. The construction work, the lies, the surgery, all of it. Some relatives looked shocked and whispered to each other. Others came up and hugged us. Uncle's cousin offered Dad a better job at his electronics factory. Uncle Wei got invited to every family gathering after that. Dad started calling him brother, and they'd drink beer together on the balcony talking about business ideas. One afternoon, I found Mom and Dad in my room looking at photos from the construction sites that manager Zhao had sent me. Mom traced her finger over one where I was carrying cement bags. She called me their builder daughter with pride in her voice instead of shame. Lily's final medical checkup came 6 months after the surgery. The doctor examined her thoroughly and said she was completely healed with no complications at all. He shook Dad's hand and said we'd done everything right during her recovery. Dad came to my room that night with an envelope. Inside was all the emergency money I'd saved up over 2 years, minus what we'd spent on the surgery. He said it was for my education since I'd earned every bit of it. His eyes were wet when he handed it over. Graduation day finally arrived in late June. I walked across the stage to get my high school diploma while my family cheered from the audience. Mom and Dad were crying openly in their seats. Lily was jumping up and down, clapping. Uncle and the whole construction crew had shown up and were whistling and shouting my name. After the ceremony ended, Dad pulled me aside near the school gates while everyone else was taking photos. His hands were shaking when he grabbed my shoulders, and I could see his eyes getting red. He told me I was wrong about one thing. I wasn't just the doctor they needed for Lily. I saved them all. The words came out broken and quiet, but they hit me harder than anything. Mom walked over carrying something wrapped in plastic. She pushed it into my hands, and when I opened it, her old cleaning uniform fell out. The fabric was worn thin in places and smelled like bleach. She said to keep it so I'd remember where I came from and how far I'd traveled. That night, we all had dinner together at home, Uncle included, sitting around our small table eating dumplings Mom made. We talked about normal stuff for once, my university plans, which classes I'd take, what dorm life would be like. Lily kept interrupting to talk about her own high school plans now that she was healthy. Mom and Dad mentioned their new jobs, how the schedules worked, what their coworkers were like. Nobody mentioned the past or brought up old fights. It felt weird but good, like we were a regular family finally. The next week, I started packing for university, and Lily kept sneaking into my room to steal my clothes. She'd grab my favorite shirts and hide them in her closet until I caught her. When I asked why, she admitted she was scared I'd forget about her at university. She made me promise to visit every month. 3 weeks later, Dad drove me to visit the campus before move-in day. We walked around looking at the buildings, and he kept pointing out study spots and libraries. Then he stopped walking and turned to me. He said something I never expected. Study hard, but also live. Don't carry their burdens anymore. He was finally letting me go. Mom took me shopping for university supplies with her first supervisor paycheck the following week. She kept grabbing the most expensive items off the shelves. New bedding, new towels, new everything. When I tried to suggest cheaper options, she shook her head. No secondhand stuff for her daughter, she said proudly. The construction crew organized a farewell dinner at a restaurant near the site. Manager Zhao stood up during the meal and handed me a brand new hard hat with Engineer May written in black marker. He said it was for when I build skyscrapers. Everyone clapped, and Uncle's eyes got watery again. A few days before I left, Lily showed me her medication organization system. She had everything labeled and scheduled in a notebook with alarms on her phone. She'd been managing it herself for months without me noticing. She said she learned responsibility from watching me. The morning before move-in day, we took a family photo in front of our apartment building. All of us together, including Uncle. Dad's arm was around my shoulder, relaxed and proud instead of controlling. Mom's hands, completely healed now, held Lily close. We all looked happy. Actually happy. Moving day arrived, and we loaded everything into Dad's car. As I was checking my bags one last time, I found an envelope tucked between my clothes. Inside was money and a note in Mom's handwriting. For emergencies, or just for fun, love, your proud parents. I put it in my pocket and got in the car. Dad started driving toward campus while Mom kept turning around from the front seat to look at me. Lily held my hand the whole way there. When we arrived at the dorms, other families were unpacking too. My family helped carry everything up to my room, and Mom started making my bed while Dad assembled my desk lamp. Lily arranged my books on the shelf. Uncle took photos of everything. When it was time for them to leave, nobody wanted to go first. Mom hugged me tight and whispered that she was proud. Dad shook my hand like I was an adult. Lily cried a little but tried to hide it. Uncle patted my shoulder and said the construction site would miss me. Then they left, and I watched their car disappear down the street. I stood there holding the envelope they gave me, feeling their trust in my pocket. This was my future now, and they were letting me have it. Well, that's been quite the ride exploring all these questions together. Thanks for letting me wonder right along with you. Subscribe for more content like this.